Hi, my name is John Wilkinson. I'm a PwC partner and leader of PwC's forensics team in the Middle East. I just wanted to talk through some of the findings from the Global Economic Crime Survey 2014 and their relevance to the Middle East. PwC asked over 5,000 respondents from 95 countries for their views on economic crime, and including over 230 respondents from 9 Middle Eastern countries. The headline that everybody's usually interested in is how much economic crime was reported by Middle Eastern companies. Well, this year the number was 21% of Middle Eastern organisations that responded to the survey had suffered economic crime in the last 2 years. Now that's down from 28% in 2011 and far less than the global average of 37%. But does that really paint the true picture? And what's the real backstory to this? In fact, those organisations in the Middle East that had suffered economic crime in the last 2 years had had more average incidents than organisations in any other region of the world. And the average cost, the loss that was suffered by those organisations, was also higher than other regions in the world. So what does that mean? For me, we have a situation here of the haves and the have-nots. The haves are those organisations that have implemented specific measures to detect and prevent economic crime, fraud within their organisation. By contrast, there are those organisations that have not implemented measures. And one of the key findings from our survey was that very few organisations in the Middle East have actually gone through a process of implementing specific controls and frameworks to address the issues of fraud and economic crime. Now, looking forward is also very instructive, and we asked all survey participants their views of the risks specifically that they are facing in the future. And almost 40% of the participants in the Middle East thought that they would face a risk of economic crime in the next 12 months. Perhaps not surprisingly, the CEOs and the executives we spoke to had 3 specific areas that they were really worried about, in addition to the usual area of asset misappropriation or theft of assets such as cash or inventory, which is a very common type of economic crime. The 3 areas they were most worried about were procurement fraud, cybercrime, and bribery and corruption. Now, each of those 3 areas are areas that we see in our daily business within forensic services. But I just want to talk about 2 specifically. The first, cybercrime, is already a major issue in the region, and we've seen a number of high-profile cases. Organisations are exposed, potentially due to the lack of sophistication of the systems which are put in place to address that issue. But for me, there are 2 challenges. One is the macro-political issue. Organisations are more exposed in the Middle East because of the macro-political environment. But very few organisations have looked at their control systems in a holistic way. That is, away from just looking at it as an IT issue. This is not a question of IT security and firewalls. Most of the big issues arose due to social engineering, so obtaining data from employees or contractors of the organisation and allowing the hackers, the cyber criminals, to break into the systems of the organisation. So executives need to take a far more proactive and holistic view of a cybercrime issue. The buck does not stop simply with the security department. With regard to bribery and corruption, the Middle East region is viewed by international investors as relatively high risk, with a number of the countries in the Middle East in the highest risk categories. Now, regional governments have done a lot of work over the last few years establishing anti-corruption bodies, but their work is necessarily quite nascent and enforcement actions have been relatively few. So for me, again, this is a case of the haves and the have-nots. Those organisations that have to comply with more stringent anti-corruption laws, such as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the UK Bribery Act, and those organisations that don't, because they're not subject to any particularly stringent laws and regulations. So those are the key messages that I take away from the 2014 Global Economic Crime Survey. I hope you find it an interesting read, and if you'd like to see a version online, please visit www.pwc.com/ME.